All right, it is top of the hour, so welcome everyone. Let me go ahead and stop our tunes and do just a very preliminary welcome, first of all. My name is Dave Ross. I'm the Principal Agile Product Evangelist at Miro, and I am super thrilled to be here today with all of you. It's our last webinar of the year, and this is a very rainy, nasty, kind of chilly seasonal day in Austin, where I'm based. But where I would normally want to curl up with a nice book in front of a roaring fire and some hot chocolate, we're going to do the next best thing today and curl up and talk about prioritization. So let me just explain how we're going to move forward today. After we get through the introductions, I'm going to turn everything over to our two esteemed guests, who I'm going to introduce here in a minute. We'll spend the bulk of our time with that discussion between Jason and Harry, and then we'll have some time at the end for audience questions. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to add them to the Q&A that should be available at the bottom of your screen. Also, just to be aware from a housekeeping perspective, this session's being recorded, and a recording will be available for download after the fact. It's going to be on the registration page where you originally registered for this webinar. It may take us a little while just because of the holidays to get it up and loaded. So look for that. So let me just give a Miro welcome to Jason Tanner. Jason, of course, co-hosts this series of webinars with us. He's the CEO of Applied Frameworks, and he's going to be the main host with Harry this morning. And then, of course, our guest today is Harry Max. Harry has a long and distinguished career, and I'll let you read all about it here, all of the great places that he's worked, and in all of the different team environments that he's worked. And he's bringing sort of a singular point of view today on prioritization, which is such an important topic to all kinds of different teams and all kinds of different industries. He's coming up with a book called Managing Priorities, Creating Better Plans and Making Smarter Decisions, which is going to be coming out in the first quarter of next year. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Harry and what he wants to give us an advanced taste of from his book. So I'm going to stop there and stop my share, and I will turn it over to you, Jason and Harry. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dave, for the intro. And certainly had a great year working with Miro, producing all these webinars. I think we've covered a lot of different topics, covered a lot of ground with some really interesting experiences. And of course, it's a great one to finish the year with, because working with some people even this week, still working on priorities for next year. So it may be really timely to talk about this topic, since it's always a big deal for annual planning to figure out what are the priorities. So Harry, welcome.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. It's super exciting to start to get to share this material with folks. I'm excited the book is coming out, and I'm definitely excited to be getting presents soon. Where would you like to start, Jason?
I think probably good framing would be to talk about the big problems with prioritization. Why is this always so painful?
Yeah. So if you step back from all of this, the book basically takes the approach that the best organizations somehow figure out how to prioritize, and they rely on teams that are effective at prioritization. And those teams are composed of individual contributors and frontline managers that are, that know how to figure out what matters most. And the challenge is that for individual contributors, typically people conflate prioritization with time management and personal productivity. So they don't think of prioritization as kind of a first-class citizen on its own. And organizations tend to conflate prioritization with annual or strategic planning. But your priorities are your inputs to your plans and your decisions. They're not your plans and your decisions. They're just part of it. And so unpacking all of this is really where I'm focusing to sort of slow the process down and help people step back and recognize that, the act of prioritizing is really just one piece of an overall process for making sure that you are, determining whether you have enough time to do it and whether it's appropriate, and how you engage in the process, and sort of figuring out who your stakeholders are and talking to them, gathering information and metadata and all of the stuff that's necessary to sort of begin, to identify the items themselves that need to be prioritized, and then figure out, what frameworks you're going to use, or what sorting methods or marketplace simulations or whatever you're going to do. And then finally, once you have that all together, to execute the act of prioritizing so that you have ultimately, a force ranked list of, the things that matter most and least, and the stuff in the center that allows you to sort of make more dynamic trade-offs.
Mhm. So, considering everything you just said, what process or processes have you found most effective for teams or leaders to work through the priorities?
So I think the first thing is making sure that you're intentional about the process itself. Because I think what happens is most people just kind of do what they've heard works, or they do what they've been doing. But if you actually step back from it and look at the fact that prioritizing is a process, and there are different ways of approaching that process, if you're mindful is not really the right word. If you're thoughtful about it and intentional about it, you can get significantly better results, because the process is explainable to other people. The results, can be traced back through the process to how you achieved those results. So I use the acronym DGAP: decide, engage, gather, arrange, and prioritize. Decide, if this is the process I talked about a few minutes ago. Just slow it all down and recognize that if you're intentional about it, if you engage in the process and identify your stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are internal to yourself, like your internal CFO, maybe I shouldn't buy that car, right? Or your external stakeholders, or your even further than that, right? How you go about gathering and capturing the information, the metadata about that information, to isolate the items themselves. And I separate items from priorities. Your items are unprioritized priorities, right? Your priorities are items that have been priorities. So I separate those so that you can talk about what those items are, independent of them being priorities, until you've gone through the process. And then being really intentional about what framework you're going to use, or frameworks, or what sorting techniques, or how you might compose these things. You might have multiple frameworks where the output of one framework becomes the input to another. So for example, for those of you who are familiar with, prune the product tree, or prune the future, as it's sometimes called, the output of that might go into an impact effort matrix, where you look at, here are the things we think we need to do, but let's talk about what kind of impact they're going to have. So being intentional about making sure you're thinking through, what are you trying to get out of it, and how will you know if you have that, and then picking either the frameworks or the sorting techniques, marketplace simulations, if you will, like buy a feature or whatever you might do, to generate a set of, initial, provisionally prioritized items that become the beginning of the conversation that you can start having with people.
Mhm. So the template you created, the prioritization pyramid, aptly named the max prioritization pyramid. What can you tell us about that and how that fits into the process?
Sure. The prioritization pyramid is a framework that I've used multiple times in situations that are too complex for simple, having a simple force rank list, or using a simple framework like, the urgent versus important, somewhere where you've got, multiple categories of priorities, and multiple backlogs, and multiple time horizons. And I've been in just too many situations, especially in my, my history as a kind of product design and development leader, where having something simple isn't good enough, right? You can't just look through the lens of team prioritization. You have to step back and look at it through the lens of organizational prioritization, even if you're going to be dealing with product and service priorities in that context. So I snapped a couple of slides together to make it less abstract, and maybe the thing to do is let me share my screen and I'll kind of walk people through what it is, why it's important, and how it works. Does that work?
Absolutely.
All right. So hopefully I'll be able to control my screen. So I just described kind of what the framework is. It's a pyramid. It has primarily 3 time horizons in it, and I'll show you those in a minute, and then multiple categories. And it's really good for having short, medium, and long-term priorities across multiple multiple different categories of things. So for example, a category might be, product features. Another category might be tech debt. Another category might be user experience or experience design related stuff, or process improvements or whatnot. And you can use the pyramid in all sorts of different environments. I've used it for entrepreneurial ventures. I've used it in startups. I've used it for transformations. I've used it for a couple of pivots. I've used it in 2 turnarounds where it's been particularly helpful to get people all on the same page about what it's going to take to kind of run the business that you have, and what it's going to take to transform or pivot the business over time. So the idea is the pyramid itself, and of course there's a Miro template now that's available for you all to grab, allows for kind of directional alignment between the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid, which is really, those are the items or the priorities, if you will, that are required to kind of keep things going as they are. And the stuff at the top is really where you're headed. So the stuff in the middle is your peanut butter that holds the bread together. And so if you have your backlog tied to your priorities in a category like product features and capabilities, it's helpful because the strategy is clear, because you've got directional alignment. And jumping over to the right-hand side of the screen, it's if you've got multiple categories, like you've got product design and development on one side, tech debt is another category, potentially. You may have process improvements or automation related things. If they're in the same time horizon, what you have is lateral alignment, which makes it a lot easier to have discussions with peers about the kinds of trade-offs that are being made in kind of the day in and day out things that come up that you have to sort of do horse trading and negotiation when it comes to resource allocation and figuring out what you're not going to do, right? And the other thing that's great about it is when you tie what's required to sort of run the business that you have today with the transformation efforts that you have, the things that you're learning allow you to inform the things that you need to be planning for, and so on and so forth. So the model is particularly helpful in that particular regard, and I'm going to show you an example of it. So the steps to using the pyramid, which are outlined in the Miro template, are you gather all the items, you have whatever conversations you're going to have. I've done this by, either one-on-one, where I've talked to people about what they thought, okay, what do we need to do today? What do we need to do long-term? Okay, how are we going to connect those things? And I've done it in group settings where, it's a lot messier, but it's a lot more fun, right? Often you're going to have to deduplicate, clarify items that aren't self-evident. You want to place the long-term or strategic top priority at the top of the pyramid. These are things you could think of them as goals, but I tend to think of them as more outcome-oriented priorities. We can talk about that more later. Group logically related items into fewer than 5 categories or affinity groups. This is like, okay, if you get a bunch of stuff, a bunch of them are probably going to be maybe product features and capabilities. So you want to kind of affinity group those, because you're going to end up comparing and contrasting those with one another, where you don't want them in this particular model, you don't want them competing visually with things like, process improvements. Then you separate the items by time horizon, right? So here's what we have to do now. These are the more urgent oriented things versus these are the things that we're going to need to invest in order to get where we want to go long term. And then super helpful to be more explicit about what criteria are you going to use for making trade-offs, And those criteria can be different for each group, well, for each time horizon rather. And I'll show you that in a second. And then you can do simple stack ranking. If it's too complicated, you could do paired comparison. Either, there are plenty of online tools for doing paired comparison, which, forces you to say, okay, if I had to do this, gun to the head, if I had to do this or had to do this, or had to choose which one was going to be more important, which one would it be? Which one would win? And if you do that across, 5 or 10 or 20, it gets complicated when you get to more than about 25 paired comparison sorts, just because it takes a lot of time, but it does force you to kind of get to a force ranked list. And that gives you a picture of kind of how the world would look. And then you can start having conversations about, okay, does this stand up under the pressure test of conversations that people are having? And you just refine it, and it should say verify, but it says verity, which is a clever little word. So the idea here's an example from All Clear ID, which was a transformation effort that I led. All Clear ID was at one point in time the leader in breach response. They did the Home Depot breach. They did the Sony. You may remember the Sony breach where the North Koreans hacked the studio. All Clear ID did the Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield breach, and this transformation effort was for the Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield scaling up. I had originally helped the company. I got the company off the ground as a product designer when it was founded back in 2005. And then I returned in 2015, I think, to help scale the company up. And this particular process where we went through, and if you look at the bottom, kind of the bottom of the pyramid, that time slice, the items that are in that list, and disregard the colors, incidentally, that's an artifact of this particular process. The focus of that area was really on executing the business that we had. I mean, we had the Department of Homeland Security in this. We had hundreds of millions of people were affected by the All Clear ID work. So running the business that we had was crucial. We couldn't go down. It was kind of a 4 nines plus environment. And so we really had to be very, very thoughtful about the kinds of things that we were going to be automating, the kinds of tech debt that we were going to be paying down, the defects that we were going to be attempting to remove from the system, and so on and so forth. So the criteria that we developed were really, deliver as promised, keep the team engaged, don't create any more tech debt, reduce the heroics and risks that were going into running the business that we had. And looking at what we wanted to do long term, the focus was really around creating the future that we wanted to have. And that was really the focus was planning there. And to connect all that, we were going to have to develop a new set of capabilities. We were going to have to add flexible capacity, do a bunch of process improvements, and improve scalability and extensibility, and so forth and so on. So we looked at the items that were related to process automation, tech debt, defects, and enhancements, new features and capabilities. We went through all that process, and crazy as it is, like when we finally got through all of this, we were able to communicate. We being me largely, I was able to communicate to the board that we needed an additional $17 million in order to get where we needed to go, and they wrote the check. So we then embarked on a 2-year effort to reinforce the system that we had, to re-platform the engine, and go on from there. So once again, the layers are really, I think of those as time horizons, and you can call them whatever you want. I happen to call them kind of get your house in order, reinforce the foundation, create the future. But I've had feedback that get your house in order really ought to be like create the foundation. But in All Clear ID's case, it was really about shoring up what we were doing to keep the business running as it was. So and there was a lot of chaos in the system, so we had to iron that out. So that was what I called it. And we went through this DGAP process: decide, engage, gather, arrange, and prioritize. We went through that, and in that process ended up identifying these categories. We didn't start with the categories. Like, we didn't start with process, tech debt, defects, features. We started off with just looking at where things landed, and then said, oh, what is this category? And we're like, oh, that category is really about paying down tech debt. And so then we labeled it. And so one of the best practices that I really discovered is definitely do not try to categorize, do not try to label the categories that you identify too early, because it causes kind of a premature optimization, and you get confused about where you're going to put things, you can have them in affinity groups, but don't label them until later. And really spend your time figuring out, is this really required based on the criteria that we've developed to focus on it now versus, long-term versus what's going to allow us to connect the long-term to the present. So this is how the model works. I've seen it work well in like one person, starting a new business, like just getting clear about, what they wanted to prioritize long term, what they needed to do to keep earning money and keep things going, and then how they were going to slowly, shift over time. Incidentally, there's an artifact in this particular picture. You see the 6B, 4B, S, 4A. That was how we approached the planning effort, because the thing to keep in mind is your priorities are your inputs to your plans and your decisions. Your priorities are not your decisions, and your priorities are not your plans. They are the beginning of the conversation, as Scott Selhorst likes to say, and they really create an opportunity for people to start really pressure testing what matters most and why, and ultimately it's the output of those conversations that become your final priorities, which then inform your plans and your decisions. So back to the notion of coherency and strategy alignment. When you're looking at an individual category, that helps you understand really where you're going to be focusing. And incidentally, like if you look at the lower left-hand side, those items are force ranked in there. So they're messy. This was a real life effort. This is not like, okay, this item was obviously above this item. When we were writing these things out, there was some work that had to happen to clean this all up. But fundamentally, in Horizon 1, the priorities showed up like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next priority jumped up to the longer time horizon of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in Horizon 2, and so on and so forth. And then, as I said earlier, the horizontal allows you to really debate across a given time horizon to do whatever horse trading you're going to need to do for resource allocation and so on and so forth. And this allows you to maintain multiple backlogs. Not that that's necessarily a great practice. You get to decide. But in the case of, we had like 6 or 7 different teams here doing all sorts of different stuff: security program management, product design, new feature development, so on and so forth. So there wasn't resource contention across a lot of stuff. It allowed us to have those conversations and decide what we were going to do and focus, and how we were going to focus and why. There's always a question of, well, can you use the pyramid to maintain these priorities over time? I've not had success doing that. This is really a great place to create kind of a consensual reality to get people on the same page right up front. Frankly, I've been doing this more and more in Miro, and I'm finding it easier to start maintaining things in Miro, but as a static document like this one, which turned into a giant poster, very hard to maintain. So at least as it related to the All Clear ID effort, I've built out a spreadsheet that allows you to pivot around and sort of look at everything. So the same things that are represented in the pyramid are represented here, right? The different time horizons, but we could also, the different categories, but we were also able to add additional fidelity so that we could sort by things like, okay, how much impact is this going to have? What kind of effort is going to take, and so on and so forth. And that's the gist of the pyramid. I personally have found it very, very helpful. It's the other distinction I would say is there are 2 really general categories of prioritization, right? One is episodic prioritization, right? It's where you're doing it kind of once or very infrequently. And then there's habitual prioritization, right? Periodic prioritization. And I found the priorities pyramid to be particularly helpful in episodic prioritization, where you're really trying to get things going. You're trying to get people on the same page. You're trying to get a new team aligned, and so on and so forth. But ongoing prioritization, I haven't used it as successfully for that. I found other tools, including the spreadsheet the magic spreadsheet that I have here, to be more helpful for doing, ongoing annual and strategic planning related work. So those are the, let's see, let me stop my share. That's kind of the wall of words associated. Am I done sharing, by the way? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of the wall of words associated with what the pyramid is, why it's important, how it works. The application area is kind of a real life example of it. Um, where does that leave you, Jason?
So it sparked a lot of questions. I didn't want to interrupt you as you're going. So the
Yeah.
first question I had that may be relevant for everybody is, how do you think about the time frame for each horizon? Like for that example, was Horizon 1 like the next 3 to 6 months, and Horizon 2 was the rest of the year, and then the top is 3 to 5 years? Should people make sense of deciding how to use a pyramid for their own purpose for their time horizons?
That's a stunningly good question, because of course, in this environment, I knew I had 24 months. So the 24 months is what was required to get the first 2 layers done. If I could address the priorities in the first layer, that kept the business running. And if we could execute the bulk of the transformation that was identified in the second layer, that bought us the right to continue to the third layer. So in this case, it was a 24-month window, and that was sort of presupposed going into it. But I think it's very much a context-dependent kind of question. In other environments I've seen the top of the pyramid be much further out. I have recently been working with a client that really tried to make that 10 years. And I just said that is just not reasonable, because nothing will be the same in 10 years. And so I suggested we pull it back to 4 to 5 years. And so I'm looking at that as kind of at least practically speaking, the outside window, because it's just so hard to anticipate how things are going to play out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you made an interesting comment at the end about the difference between episodic versus habitual prioritization. When you say episodic, do you mean once a quarter or once a year?
I look at those are both habitual,
Uh-huh.
right? They're just on big time frames.
Yeah.
Episodic would be you have to execute a turnaround.
Mhm.
You've got you're going to acquire a business, right? You're not likely to be doing that on any kind of periodic basis.
Okay.
It's possible, but not usual. So episodic is once or infrequently and unpredictable, whereas habitual can be, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and at NASA every 24 months.
Got it. Because that was a question that one of the attendees asked. What is the cadence or guidance for ideas you have on when to reevaluate priorities?
Yeah, I cover that in the book, and that has a lot to do with the rate of change in the environment and the type of work that you're doing. So it's not, I don't have a straightforward answer right now, and I'd actually have to go back and look at what I wrote.
Yeah.
That was a question that came up fairly late in writing the book, as I realized I wasn't at all clear about that myself. So I hate giving you the consultant's answer, but it depends.
It's always a good place to start with, at least quarterly. I think the second thing, and the way I would answer it, is it depends on the rhythm of your market.
Huge.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
and the type of customer you serve, because when we think about, B2C, fast moving, really want to provide a lot of value and update the mobile app as frequently as we can release value. It'd be a lot different than B2B, where I've got constraints for my customers. They can't absorb a release every week, every 2 weeks. They need time to actually integrate the new release into their workflows and their journeys. So you may have a different set of rhythms. Like for my company, when I was a product manager in years gone by, our customers said 3 releases a year max, because they would take our huge system and an upgrade, and they would put it in a lab. They wouldn't put it in their production environment until they tested it themselves, and that typically took them up to 2 weeks.
Right.
It was just too disruptive to release any faster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think while it depends, I think there's some patterns for thinking through what makes sense in the context of your company.
Yeah.
The more current question is here's a good one. How can medium-term, long-term prioritization work for an AI-related product team when the industry keeps shifting every other week?
Great question. And in fact, for my how I earn money now is I'm not an operational leader like in one company, I'm a player coach, which means a fractional executive, typically product design and development. And one of my clients is actually doing an AI pivot right now, which I'm leading. And so that's a timely question. What we are finding is I've normally the kind of cadence that we have for updating, it's a value of information. Doug Hubbard, who wrote How to Measure Everything, Anything, yeah, he always jokes around. He goes, I didn't write a book on how to measure most things. I wrote a book on how to measure anything. Doug Hubbard, talks about the value of information. And in the world that we're in right now with AI technology changing as quickly, and in fact, not just the technology, but the companies that are building it, are changing like daily. And so I've upped the cadence of our meetings to daily. We have a daily pivot meeting now where we discuss changes in priorities at that frequency.
Yeah, it is fast for sure. But that's the way you deal with it, right? You got to keep that sync going.
Yeah, and just to the point of the AI pivot, okay, so we were trying to accomplish something that was in our plan, and we were pulling from the Azure capabilities, and we realized that OpenAI just came out with this stuff that meant we didn't have to do all this magic and all this, we'd have to wave a technical rubber chicken over our head to make something happen. And so, on a 30-minute pivot call, we decided, okay, well, we're going to bear the risk and we're going to go ahead and switch the APIs and go ahead and take advantage of OpenAI here. But we're going to have to monitor this because things are changing so quick. We'd like a more stable system, but stability is kind of a hallucination in this environment right now.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so this is more of a meta question. So one of the people who've joined us wants to know whether you think prioritization is not merely a process, but a way of thinking that we must do together in order to understand, plan, and execute. So what he's after is whether effectiveness of prioritization requires a shared mindset in order to be effective.
Yes, that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because, and in fact, you and I had talked about why I wrote the book, and I didn't have some innate interest in prioritization. What happened is I was giving talks on problem framing and diagnostic thinking. I did a TEDx talk on it. I was asked to speak at South by Southwest on it. I was giving the talk at companies like USAA and Adobe and so on and so forth. Nobody really had any interesting questions about that. But when I touched on prioritization, all the hands went up. And the further I looked into, I sat down and I thought, I should probably write a book on this. And I called a friend of mine who's a publisher, Lou Rosenfeld of Rosenfeld Media. And I said, hey, Lou, have you seen anything good on prioritization? I can't find anything. And he goes, well, I know there are hundreds of books that talk about how important it is, but I can't find any that really tell you how to do it. And as I was writing the book, I realized it's a mindset. It's very much, there are skills and capabilities associated with it. There is definitely a meta process and processes associated with it, but it is absolutely a mindset. And my giant personal transformation, kind of macro level takeaway now is everything I'm looking at starting to look like a prioritization problem or opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So is this idea of the architecture of prioritization a metaphorical ladder that eventually we kick away, or do we always need some type of persistently available structure or enabling structure?
I think we need a persistent enabling meta process, which is what DGAP is: decide, engage, gather, arrange, prioritize, because we are effectively prioritizing all the time, right? If something is going to kill me, I'm going to quickly prioritize not having that happen, right? We are so good at certain types of prioritization because it's required for our survival, but we are so unconscious of how limited our capability is and our skill is in this area, that if we can significantly upgrade that and install it and then stop thinking about it, it'll be a little bit like driving, where we get where we're going and we don't realize how we got there.
Yeah. So here's another question. When you're thinking about operationalizing the priorities, how do you ensure that the work to get the house in order and reinforcing the foundation doesn't prevent you from ever getting to the work needed to create the future?
Uh, Boy, isn't that the timeless question? Um, I actually have a different set of tools, and I just gave a talk on this for talking roadmaps. I use a road mapping tool that has 3 different swim lanes in it, rather than like a typical roadmap would have the stuff you're committing to. But the roadmap that I really prefer to use has 3 swim lanes, which is the stuff you're committing to, the stuff you're investigating, and the stuff that's aspirational. And they all go on the roadmap. It's just the stuff that's aspirational is highly uncertain, but it still goes on the roadmap. And so I actually supplement the prioritization work with road mapping tools to increase the probability that the long-term stuff isn't going to get dropped off.
Well, the way that I think about this is that the top of the pyramid becomes a filter for anything to be added below the top of the pyramid.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'll say another way: if this isn't aligned to our future vision, why would we ever do it?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
If it's not enabling it or not actually contributing to value to getting to the future, then we shouldn't even be doing it.
Yeah, that's 100% right. I think I was answering a slightly different question, which is how do you not ignore the top of the pyramid?
Yeah, exactly. Here's another one. How do you deal with different teams that have conflicting views of importance?
So this is one of my favorite questions of all time. I get them to agree on the process by which they'll come up with that answer. And it sounds simple, but often if you can get people to agree on the process, they will often agree on the outcome, even if it's not to their liking.
Yeah. What do you think about prioritizing large sets of options using a weighted decision matrix built upon weighted variables?
So I'm a big fan, but it really depends on the environment. When it gets to stuff like that, you still often got the strategic problem, which is how are you going to filter? So in the last chapter of my book, I talk about using AHP, the analytical hierarchical process, to prevent you from falling prey to kind of the confidence that we get using numbers, when often the process by which we got those numbers is wrong. And so while I like weighted scoring, I think it's incredibly useful, but I think at a certain level, certain organizational level, I think it's largely an organizational thing. At a certain organizational level, and where the implications of those of what those priorities could translate to in terms of plans or decisions where the cost becomes very high, I think using a more robust method to make sure that you're not fooling yourself is really key.
Yeah. Real quick, Harry, the third, there was committed, investigating, and aspirational, right? For your roadmap?
Those are the buckets. And
Yeah.
Again, there's
researching.
Yeah. So keep it to that.
So the one thing about the weighted matrices is I found that the highest quality weighted matrices are more quantitative than qualitative. And that's one reason some companies I see struggle with matrices like weighted shortest job first. If it's purely qualitative, it's pretty risky. But if you actually have data that validates the assessment that you're placing on the weighting, then you're good to go. Right, it gets a lot stronger. Like, okay, we have direct evidence, for example, that this will deliver business value. We've run an experiment. We've done some A/B testing. Now we're ready to build it. And based on that evidence, I'm going to score it higher because I have quantitative evidence, as opposed to sometimes I see a lot of guessing.
100%.
A scale of 1 to 5. Oh, I think it's a 5. I think it's a 3. Well, why do you think it's a 5? Well, it's my gut. I'm like, I kind of advise against making $1 million bets on your gut. Unless you get a lot of money.
100%. That's partly why I like AHP so much, even though it's a complex method. And it's also why I don't use, I often, if I'm going to use a 1 to 5, I often tie it to a Fibonacci sequence, from 0 to 144 to make the distinctions different, much more distinctive. And that way people really have to defend. Well, really, it's not the difference between a 3 and a 4. It's hard to tell what that difference is. But if it's the difference between this and this gigantic thing over here, okay, now let's debate that out. And if you can get people on the same page about where they really are there, it's super helpful, but I completely agree. I'm a big fan of, how to measure anything. The more legitimate data you can apply to the process, the more likely you're going to get something that's defensible and works.
Yeah. The one question I wrote down when you were going through your deck was a concern with avoiding overload. Now, you mentioned that the teams sort of self-regulate how much they're going to add to the pyramid. Is there any notion of how they compare what they're adding to their capacity? How have you seen that work for some teams?
I'm not crystal clear on the question.
So the one thing that struck me is like, oh my goodness, that looks like a lot of whip for the next 3 to 6 months. What techniques have you seen be successful to regulate or avoid overload?
This is a different topic. This is not a prioritization topic. This is resource allocation and a topic, and I don't feel well prepared to speak to it directly and give anybody good advice.
Well, if it is prioritization, like, okay, we've got 10 things, but we're only going to do the first 5 in the next 3 to 6 months. We'll come back and figure out the rest later, right?
Well, I mean, if we want to get more pragmatic about it, I'll challenge myself in my answer, and I'll say, look, in the AI pivot that I'm currently in the midst of right now, we've got engineering coming back and saying, hey, we should do these things because they're easier. We've got the CEO saying we need to do these things because they're more differentiated. The line is going to change pretty dramatically. So we're having to do, like literally tomorrow, a much more detailed assessment of resource allocation and capacity, because we can't actually make an intelligent decision about where to draw the line until we understand if we can move some capacity around.
Right. Yeah. The one other comment that I think is useful, you mentioned how the sticky notes on the whiteboard were not persistent enough, so you created a spreadsheet. I actually think with your template, people could probably use the Jira integration with Miro and actually do work in Jira to prep for a prioritization session, bring it over into the template, and it's all connected. I think
that'd be the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
It'd be the smart thing to do that I haven't done.
Yeah. So Harry, I want to back way up because you said something really interesting that's near and dear to my heart, which is how you use multiple frameworks as inputs.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned prune the product tree. So maybe for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with prune the product tree and impact effort, maybe just briefly walk through your steps for how you do that.
Sure. So if you were going to use prune the product tree, for those of you who happen to not be familiar with it, it's a way of visually representing stuff that's central to the trunk versus less central on the branches versus smaller and less central on the leaves, if you will. And so in theory, stuff that's closer to the trunk or even the roots, those things are going to be harder to, they're going to be more impactful, because if you don't include those things or don't take them into consideration, you may actually be compromising whatever it is you're trying to do at a more fundamental level. So getting people to agree on sort of what's at the ground level, what's under the ground level, what's at the trunk level, what's at the branch level, what's at the twig level, what's at the leaf level, like kind of the size and value of these things. Like once you have that kind of sorted out, you might want to, like, just having an item sitting on a leaf might not tell you how impactful it's going to be or how difficult it is to build, for example. And so once you've done a prioritization effort, a kind of an initial pass using something like prune the product tree, you can take those individual items and then move them over into an impact effort matrix, where on one axis you've got the kind of impact it's going to have, and on the other axis you've got the kind of effort it's going to take. Then what you can do is say, wow, this leaf right here, it's actually going to be really, really hard to build, and its impact is actually not going to be that great. So why don't we look at some other thing that's going to have greater impact and not going to be quite so hard. So you can migrate everything from one framework to another framework, or from one framework into a different sorting mechanism, like simple weighted scoring that we discussed earlier, or WSJF, right, which is another fabulous tool. I mean, how cool would it be if you could take your time and figure out, okay, these are the things that are really central to what we're doing, and these things are really important, but they're not central, and these things are really clever and awesome, and they're the leaves, and then move that into WSJF and then figure out, okay, these are the things we can jam through development and get out into the market and start realizing the economic benefit of those things, right? How cool would that be, right? And it doesn't just stop with two, right? You can chain these things together. It just gets a little bit unwieldy over time. Did that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was great. And I think that the most powerful applications that I've seen of printed product tree is when customers collaborate together to create the tree. So the metaphor of the tree as a product and the idea of this growth and emergence and we're bearing fruit, customers get it. And it's really interesting to see how frequently my expectations are different than what customers do. Like, I think there's some hot new feature that I may put on the tree before they play. They move it up far out the future. Like, yeah, we don't really care about that. So I think you get the best results when your customers add things to the tree. And the one tip I have is don't forget the name of the game. It's prune the product tree. So there needs to be some pruning, because you see some items on the ground, whether it's rotten fruit and we need to fix it, or we ask the question, if we had to not do something, what would that first thing be that we would prune?
Right.
And I think that adds a lot of value. And the other thing that sometimes people forget is that there's roots. So roots could be infrastructure, it could be additional technical architecture, it could be enabling technology, like for support. Like, the customers aren't going to add a feature there for improving the support platform, but we may know internally we've got to do something to fix our billing system or fix our ticket management system for support calls. That would go to the roots, all the things we need to support the growth of the product. And I like this picture because it has things like water drops. How can we sprinkle water or fertilize the tree to keep it stronger? Like, wouldn't it be cool if we had some training modules and that would like fertilize the adoption of the product over time? So really, it's a great, simple framework, but so powerful in so many ways.
Yeah, and just I want to bring that back to the DGAP, right? Decide, engage, gather, arrange, prioritize. That's picking your frameworks or sorting techniques or marketplace simulations and how you're going to potentially link those together. That's in the arrange phase of that process. And it says, look, once you've gathered all your data and you know what you're trying to either optimize for, you know what your outcome you're looking for, how do you get there? Which frameworks do you then choose, right? And so you're slowing down enough to say, let's not just do the thing that we did before. Let's figure out what we're trying to accomplish, and let's pick the right tool for the job.
Yeah, here's an interesting question. What are the ethics of prioritization? When you mentioned there's tension that exists between the differing ways that engineering weights priorities and the way the CEO does, it made the person think that meta values might govern priorities ideally, rather than settling questions by recourse to power.
Yeah, it's and this goes straight to the heart of ethics and decision making, right? And rather than try to address that, I mean, it's a complex topic, but your values can definitely be part of your criteria set for your selection, right? You don't have to separate core measurable criteria from the value, the more subjective values that you're using to actually determine what's going to be more versus less important. And I would, maybe the cheat here is to say that the more explicit you can be about that stuff and the better alignment you can get with the people who are involved in the process, the more likely you're going to get to a result that isn't going to end up being, that isn't going to surprise you in a negative, unintended way.
Yeah. So Harry, when we were writing software profit streams, we read almost as much as we wrote. And you told me you've been on this journey now for 7 years to get this book published. So what books have you found to be most valuable for strategic decisions and thinking about prioritization? What would you recommend to other people?
Wow. Well, there's a number of things. I mean, man, list, as you might imagine, is long. From a tactical kind of personal level, I really like Oliver Burkeman's work 4,000 Weeks, because I think that really addresses the myth of personal productivity, and it does so in a brilliant, very philosophical, incredibly readable way. I found Tony Fidel's book particularly good, Build, just because he unpacks his personal process and why it's so important. I found Mark Randolph's book, This'll Never Work, or That'll Never Work, right? The founding of Netflix, particularly impactful, because he really, it's like, in some ways, it was the book that the hard thing about hard things. It was like
Yeah.
the book. I found Randolph's book like spoke to those issues more pragmatically than Horowitz did.
Yeah.
But I found The Hard Thing About Hard Things also impactful. I would literally have to turn around and look at my bookshelf. There were so many books that had something important in each one for different reasons. You know, a timeless book that I've recommended thousands of times, I mean, certainly tens of times, I've given away more copies than I own, is Finite and Infinite Games by James Cars, right? And if you're unfamiliar with that book, you just buy a copy, read the first chapter, and throw the rest away, because it really it helps you wrap your head around the difference between what's the game you're playing when you're trying to win versus what's the game you're playing when you're trying to stay in the game, and how the rule sets interact with one another. Very, very powerful, simple concept, but so impactful. I think actually Simon Sinek may have done a talk on that. That's available online. That's kind of prevents you from having to buy the book and read it, and makes it the topic really accessible. But there are tens, if not hundreds, of books I would recommend to address that question and adjacencies to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean. And we got smart about 2 or 3 months before we published the book and started, making our bibliography and lists, because we knew we were going to need it. And we actually had to edit it. I think we were blowing past the page limit. So we were like, well, we got to trim out, a quarter of the book recommendations that we have based on all the research we did. So
yeah,
it's always challenging, but I like the way you said, like, what other books do you give away a lot?
I love Doug Hubbard's work, right? The How to Measure Anything, I think is, should be on everybody's bookshelf, no question whatsoever. But I realize, when you're asking this question, that one of the things that was so interesting to me just about the writing process, not that anybody, has a deep interest in my writing process, but I knew that I was converging on being able to get the book published at about 5 years, when the number of new things I was finding was getting smaller and smaller on the topic, right? For the first 5 years, I kept stumbling on new stuff because prioritization as a topic has been dismembered and balkanized and placed in every discipline you can imagine. It's in operations research, it's in every discipline, it's in, all aspects of, planning and execution and strategy, but nobody's put it all together. And so I kept finding stuff. And finally, I think it's done.
Yes, it's such a relief. So Dave, how do we do? Are we missing any questions that might have been answered? I was tracking as best I could, but I want to make sure there's nothing remaining that is burning for any of our attendees.
I think you both get an A+. You covered all the ones that I was tracking as well on the side, and I think we've answered everything in chat. So yeah, great job, guys.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here and attending, and thank you, Harry, for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. I super appreciate your help in pulling this together, and Dave for your sponsorship of all this, and Miro. It's been really fun.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you, Harry. You're welcome back anytime. And of course, I encourage everyone, go to the Miroverse, look at the template. I've sent the link several times in the chat. Take a look, and when Harry's book comes out in March, you can do an even deeper dive beyond that. So thank you both, and thanks everyone for attending today.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.